My show here at 4 Chapter Gallery is titled Who Makes You? It's a culmination of pieces that I have made throughout my time at the Kansas City Art Institute as a fiber major. Each piece I have titled after a specific person who has influenced my work throughout my time at the school. The technique that I use in my dyeing process is a technique called shibori dyeing. It's a traditionally Japanese technique that's a form of resist dyeing. My practice has developed so much since I initially learned this technique sophomore year. I sometimes am hesitant to even call it shibori dyeing anymore, but it is a form of resist dye. I have multiple layers, typically somewhere between 3 and 10 layers of dyeing that happens, different folding and rolling methods that create the patterns and colors on top of each other that I am looking for. I would say in each panel that I create, there has to be at least 3 dye baths so that you get that foreground, middle ground, and background. Often I have many more than that, so you can build up that layer of depth and shade and pattern with the resist that you have. So what drew me to the shibori style of dyeing was, in the process, you give up this sense of control when dyeing. So any color I pick really is intuitive, but the pattern sometimes is very unknown. You don't know exactly what's going to come out of it. So in the process, I enjoy having a level of control through color, but then giving up that control through pattern. The way that I do the process of rolling and folding the fabric, there's like a semi-understanding of how the pattern might come out, but you never fully know what it's going to look like. You can't fully plan the piece. So the shibori dyeing process really struck me because I could give up that sense of control. Sometimes you can be so tight in your practice that letting loose was really freeing. So being a student at the Art Institute, there is lots of different paths and mediums that you can explore throughout. I really came to this school thinking I might become a photography major, and once going through that freshman year foundations course, you're exposed to so many other mediums. It was there that I took a screen printing class with Sherry Sparks, and in that moment I really realized I loved working with my hands way more than I did digitally. I mean, I still love that aspect. You still need that as an artist, but working with your hands in a fiber process often becomes a very meditative process, and it's similar to the shibori dyeing, and that you give up some of that control and you just do. And so I decided I would go into fiber, and I haven't looked back. I love every moment of it, and I'm really glad I transitioned that way. I guess in the art field, fiber is sometimes often thought of as more craft-based than fine art. When I started working with the shibori dye method and this certain silk that I work with all the time, I was really trying to decide what is the best way to finish this piece, finish the fabric, and I explored lots of different methods, but I came to finally stretching the pieces on panels, and then they became paintings. They became this whole other life form that I feel like elevated the craft of the fiber material into a fine art material. I work with a silk rayon blend called Devray Satin. I enjoy this material because silk grabs dye in a really beautiful way, and the rayon, it has this sheen to it that really grabs the light and reflects the color in a really beautiful way. So when I start my shibori, I always think about size first. The silk comes 45 inches wide, so I decide if I'm going to do a big panel, if it's going to be 45, if I want to cut in half and do maybe 2 20s. So I start with size and multiples. I always work in multiples. And so once I've determined the size of my fabric, I start dyeing. The first dye bath always seems to influence the rest of it, and I would say my dyeing is always very intuitive. I consider color a lot, but a lot of times it's just kind of whatever my hands gravitate towards. Sometimes the first dye bath I'll just do a plain flat color, or sometimes I'll start the like rolling and folding method of the shibori resist dyeing, and then from there you put it in a dye bath for about 30 minutes, you can pull it out, wash it, rinse it, and then it can go right back into another dye bath. Sometimes I will take things a little too far and I have to pull it back with a Thiox, which is a fabric safe bleach. And a lot of my pieces here, you'll see if there's a a light yellow or green color, that'll be the thiox that pulls the color out, and then you can go back on top of that. I think, after college, I really obviously want to stay really present in the art community. I have a dream maybe of building up another set of pieces, so maybe I could have a show at the end of the year, the beginning of the next year, 2022. I think the real dream is to get a job somewhere in the art field to support myself. So for now, I can do my practice on the side, and I have a little weaving side hustle that I love. So I want a creative job so that I can sustain myself on the side to do my creative processes. In this show, you'll see a lot of my dyeing on silk, but I have this whole love of weaving on the side that I do. It really began, so sophomore year, we do all of the fiber things, but there's a whole semester on weaving, and I just really did not enjoy weaving. I didn't get along with it, and so my junior year in college, I decided to push myself, and I was like, is it possible for someone to weave 100 scarves in one semester? And then I immediately was like, well, now I have to do that. I need to make that a thing. So I really pushed myself into weaving, and then through that process, I really fell in love with weaving. It's again, a very meditative process. You're just your hands work, and your mind is just free to think and flow. And so with 100 scarves, what do you do with them? You sell them. And so I created an Etsy account, and then beyond that, I was like, well, you can only weave so many scarves, so what else can I start weaving? And I've started making pillows and bags and other such things. I would say as an artist, the pandemic has affected me in multiple ways. When this all first started, I had to convert a room in my home to be a home studio because that was all of a sudden pulled out from under me. I spoke a little earlier about this 100 scarf project that I had started, and I had started it in January right before the pandemic, and I finished it the day our school shut down. And so I had this whole huge project that all of a sudden was well, pack it up and put it home, take it home, and that's that. In the pandemic, I would say that things do feel anticlimactic in a way because we haven't had these end of semester shows that allow us to show our art. So sometimes there's moments where you're like, what am I making this for? But it's for me. I make the work for me. I enjoy the process, and I enjoy that I can bring it into the world, and then other people can enjoy it as well.